This is the wealth of the past. My guest today is Thomas Lockley. He is a lecturer at Nihon University College of Law in Tokyo, where courses he's taught include the International History of Japan, Britain and Japan in History, and East Asia and Japanese History. He is the author of Yasuke-The True Story of the legendary African samurai. Yasuke was the first foreign-born samurai, and his astonishing journey led him from Northeast Africa to the heights of Japanese society. This book presents the never-before-told biography of this singular figure, one whose travels between countries, cultures, and classes offer a new perspective on race in world history and a vivid portrait of life in medieval Japan. To be completely honest, I had some Skype problems during my interview. Thank you to my beloved internet provider, TPG. So I had to edit some parts for easy listening. Nonetheless, I'm sure you'll enjoy this episode, the story of Yasuke, the legendary African samurai.
I think Yasuke is a man who we can all relate to as an inspiration. I think his life essentially was almost a miracle. I mean, you couldn't make it up. I mean, I could have written this as a fiction story and it wouldn't have been as good as the fact. So I think the story itself is amazing, but Yasuke himself is an inspiration. He is very calm. He's very intelligent. He's got at least 4 or 5 languages. He navigates his way through a world which is not his world, and he rises to the top of a society on the other side of the world from where he was born. I think that's a pretty amazing thing.
It really blew me away. So I was just curious about the research process in writing this book.
Yeah, sure. Oh, well, I started around about 9 years ago, originally meaning to make a fiction. But as I found out more about the actual fact, as I said before, it's better than fiction, as you couldn't make it up. So in the end, it became a factual book. I had a daughter 8 years ago, and that kind of stopped the process of writing, dead in its tracks. And then a son came along as well. But then about 4 years ago, I resurrected the project and as an academic paper, just a short paper. I thought that would be enough, but when we got to the 10,000 word limit, that was no way enough. So it became a book, which was originally released in Japanese in 2017. And then we went on with my co-author, Jeffrey Gerard, excellent guy, went on to produce the book which you see in front of you today.
Fantastic. And I know that there were multiple accounts written, right? Fictitious accounts of Yasuke's tales?
Sure, he's not an unknown historical character. He's quite well known, but his character in the past has been seen as one which is too niche, perhaps, to make into a full book. I decided to try for the full book, and there was plenty of information there to do that. And recreating his world, the world he saw, the world he lived in, proved to me to be just as rich as his own life. What did he see in Kyoto when he was running through Kyoto? What did Kyoto look like at those times? What did Mount Fuji look like in those times? What was a battle like in those times? There's so much there which he would have. Okay, we don't have his own recollections of it, but we know he was there. We know he saw those things, and therefore I think it's perfectly legitimate to write that into a book. So the fictitious accounts were mainly they started in the 1960s. There's another one in 1971, and then in the last 20 years, there have been various different accounts written by a whole load of people. Some of them, one of them is a movie with Abe Hiroshi, and he's Yasuke's grandchild, for example. So he pops up in all sorts of places. You look on IMDb, the movie database, you'll find about 9 projects or 10 projects in total linked to Yasuke. And I'm pretty sure there's a couple more out there which are not actually listed as well. So most of them are documentaries, manga, anime, but there's at least 2 to 3 Hollywood movies. And Chadwick Boseman's one is simply the one which is more public about their progress. So I think we can say that there's going to be an awful lot of Yasuke on your screens in the next 5-6 years.
You can't complain. The more Yasuke, the better.
I could hardly agree there. Yeah,
absolutely. So I guess let's jump right into the story then.
Go for it.
So for the listeners that haven't read the book or aren't familiar with this story, who was Yasuke? Where did he come from?
The book is called African Samurai, and it's available pretty much anywhere you need to buy it from. He was, in my opinion, he was from Northeast Africa, probably from what is now South Sudan. Other people think he may have come from Mozambique, but I think the evidence is stronger that he was from Northeast Africa. You can see why if you read the notes at the back of the book. He was trafficked as a child, almost definitely, to India, where he probably became a slave soldier, what's called a Habshi in India. He would have fought there for several years. It was a time of turmoil in India, just as it was in many parts of the world at this time. And somehow he then was employed, probably not as a slave, by a Jesuit called Alexandro Valiano. Now, Valiano was the chief Jesuit in the whole of Asia, and he was on a tour of inspection, essentially, of all of the missions, which were very, very recent missions. So they were all quite, they're really kind of in an immature state, and his job was to develop them into a mature state. He went through the whole of Asia, from India with Yasuke to Malacca to Macau in southern China, and then eventually in 1579 they ended up in what is Kyushu in Japan.
Wow. It's I think the backdrop to this story is quite incredible. You have the Christian influence in Japan, ever expanding with the Jesuits. There's Yasuke's backstory. I was thinking just before this interview, man, this guy, he already had a wealth of experience before he even reached Japan.
Sure, absolutely. But he's representative of millions of people like him who would have done similar things. They just didn't quite rise to the level of being Nobunaga's bodyguard. Anybody connected with Nobunaga, for those of you that know anything about Japanese history, anybody connected with him is automatically famous. He is possibly one of the biggest and most revered characters in the whole of Japanese history, one of the world's great leaders. And to this day, if you walk into any Japanese bookshop, whether it's a specialist in history or just in a train station, you will find a book about Nobunaga. Probably a lot more than one on the sale. And he's probably the only character in Japanese history which you can say that about. So the fact that Yasuke made that jump to be Nobunaga's samurai meant that his life is recorded. And millions of other people who will have done similar things to him and lived similar lives prior to the Nobunaga episode are not recorded. And therefore, I think Yasuke is also a symbol of many other people in the world.
I couldn't agree more. I think, what he represents is, he's the man, the myth, the legend.
Yeah.
And it's incredible. It's so interesting how, you can't make this up, how he even came across someone such as Valiano, who there are multiple accounts of him in the history books, and someone like Oda Nobunaga, arguably one of the most famous men in Japanese history. It's incredible how, the scene was sort of set up here.
Well, if you think about it, you're always going to have the most important Catholic trying to meet the most important Japanese warlord in the country. The Catholic Valiano needed the protection of Nobunaga to continue his mission. Therefore, it's not quite as bizarre as it may at first seem, because those two were destined to meet, and it's just happened that Yasuke was there at the time. But what happens after that is Yasuke rising on merit. It's not Yasuke just being there at the time. He had a dose of luck right at the beginning, just there. However, we find from various sources that Nobunaga really loved him. He loved talking to him. He couldn't stop talking to him, one of the sources said. What they talked about, we don't know, but I can hypothesize that two warriors would talk about war. One warrior who'd been in many different fields, battlefields and theaters, Yasuke, would, I'm pretty sure, have been asked a lot of questions by Nobunaga, and he would have talked about things like cannons, elephants, things which would have been exotic to Nobunaga, but which Yasuke would have seen and probably fought with and against. We also hear him after this. He's given servants, he's given his own house, he's given a sword, which makes him technically the first foreign samurai in Japanese history. There may well have been others beforehand, but nobody bothered to write about them. So Yasuke can take that crown because he's recorded. Again, it's because he was written about rather than because of anything else. The other thing is about Yasuke is that we know that he must have had an extremely good demeanor. I mean, he's described as having a good demeanor anyway by one of the Japanese sources. However, to be able to... So, for example, he's caught in a riot in Kyoto among probably 5,000-6,000 people who want to get a view of him, perhaps to touch him. They're trying to knock down the church which he's in to get a look at him. People are dying in the crowd through the crush, and Yasuke, if that was me, I would have been absolutely packing it. I would have been really scared. I wouldn't have been able to, at the end of it, I probably wouldn't have been able to stand up. Nobunaga hears this, sends his soldiers to clear away this crowd, and then demands to hear who's been breaking his peace. Yasuke is taken before Nobunaga, probably within 10 minutes of being in fear of his life. By that time, he is extremely calm, he is extremely well behaved, and he is wowing Nobunaga and his court with everything. To me, even thinking about that kind of composure is something special in itself.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, just so stoic, running for your life, people think you're some sort of god or something, right?
Yeah.
They thought, wasn't he thought of as Daikokuteng in the flesh or something like that?
That's hypothesis, but yes, that would have been the kind of view that the contemporary Japanese people would have had. They would have associated black skin with deities or with devils, one of the two.
Yeah.
And because that's what Japanese temples have as black-skinned within the temples. So, I mean, there are also green-skinned and blue-skinned and red-skinned deities, devils, etc. However, I mean, they would never have seen anybody like Yasuke before. And I think it's worth saying that they would have never seen anybody so big as him before. 6'2" in those days for Japan was like a 7-foot person today, perhaps even bigger. And although it must be apocryphal, he had the strength of 10 men, which, that is not entirely true. He probably had the strength of 3 or 4 men. So 6'2", really, really strong and black. Kyoto went wild for him. He was the latest idol, if you like. And that was possibly a slightly difficult thing for him to deal with, but he did. He dealt with it.
Absolutely. I mean, you're running for your life. People have died to, come and see you. And then, you meet the most powerful man in Japan, and you just have to remain calm and bow. Keep your head down.
Absolutely.
So is it true that Nobunaga, couldn't believe that, Yasuke was black and asked him to scrub his skin?
Sure. I mean, I think we can also hypothesize that Nobunaga probably thought he was a public relations trick of the Jesuits. Maybe they'd been painting him up in battle paint or something to look like something else. I mean, the Jesuits were always bringing gadgets and new things to Nobunaga, clothes, a globe, for example, because that was the kind of thing that Nobunaga liked, and the Jesuits needed his protection and his patronage. So from Nobunaga's point of view, that may well have been a reasonable explanation. So he politely asked Yasuke to strip to the waist, and then he there are different versions. He either scrubbed Yasuke himself, or he had Yasuke scrubbed by one of his servants. Of course, the pigment did not come out, and therefore Yasuke was proven to be real. And Nobunaga then throws a massive party, invites his sons, his nobles. Yasuke is the guest of honor. At the end of the party, Yasuke is made a rich man. He's given a lot of money, and 32 kilos worth of copper coins. 32 kilos is an awful lot, and I think it was probably a bit of a joke to get this really strong guy also to be carrying his fortune away. 32 kilos. I don't think I could just pull up 32 kilos. Probably you couldn't either. And so, yeah, I think that there's multiple layers of jokes and mirth and friendship already coming into it. A bit of teasing here as well.
Yeah.
And that brings on to the next stage in a few days' time. We don't know exactly when and how, but it brings on to the fact of Yasuke then being transferred into Nobunaga's service by Valiano. Valiano had his own audience 2 days later, and it would have, if I had been Valiano and I knew that Nobunaga was showing interest in my man, if you like, my bodyguard, I think I would have then just said, okay, I don't need him right now. Please employ him. He's yours if you want.
Yeah, I guess it was a good political move in some ways.
Oh yeah,
on Valiano's part. Yeah, I find Oda Nobunaga such an interesting fellow. I guess like most people at the time, it's hard to kind of, look back on the past and judge. Because I thought, man, this guy's, he's hiring ninjas to kill people on toilets. He's killing servants when he comes back from hunting or something like that, when where he was living wasn't clean to his liking. So there's that. But then he also, unified Japan, and he's such a forward thinker.
He was a man for his times. These were brutal times. He wouldn't have got very far if he'd been a weaker man. He started his life as in a very weak position, and he spent his whole life fighting to better that position. And although, we can all say there's a good dose of selfishness in the wanting to be the ruler of Japan, he also did specifically say that it was to bring peace to the people as well. Unfortunately, to bring peace to the people, a lot of them had to die. But they were the enemy people. His own people, the people on his side, the people under his protection, apart from in very rare cases like that you mentioned with the servants, were very, very pleased to be under his rule. He had economic policies in an age where economics was didn't even exist. He had economic policies which improved marketplaces, improved tax regimes for people so that they could work rather than be taxed to death, essentially, which is what happened, for example, in Europe at these times. That's the age he lived in. We live now in an age of relative peace, and we live in an age of human rights. We're blessed with international organizations like the United Nations, which guarantee those rights or attempt to guarantee those rights. None of that existed in those days, and the world was as it was.
And it's so hard to try and understand what life was like, in the late 1500s. But I think this book did a really good job at painting the picture.
I'll tell you one thing. There's a book I read recently about the Elizabethans, and it was that's in England. It started, the first sentence in the book, I can't remember the author's name, unfortunately, was, "We tend to think the Elizabethans were like us, but lived 400 years ago. Full stop. They were nothing like us." And the reason for that is exactly the same reason as we can think about Nobunaga as being nothing like us, because he couldn't be. He didn't live in the world, the blessed world that we live in, where we are allowed to be peaceful, or we're allowed to have human rights, etc., etc.
Yes. Do you think that Yasuke was sort of a part of Nobunaga's plan? Because he was so forward-thinking, and I've read an excerpt in the book about that, how it kind of, Yasuke kind of represented how sort of modern, I guess, and forward-thinking Nobunaga was.
Well, Nobunaga didn't know that Yasuke existed until the second that they met, so I don't think he could have been planned in advance. However, when Nobunaga saw Yasuke and when he decided that he wanted this man in his employ, it was part of a process of events that Nobunaga had engaged in and was still to engage in until his death. He did things that were different from other people. He didn't care about doing things the traditional way. He made his own traditions. So why the hell not employ a foreigner to be your one of your inner circle?
No, it makes total sense. And just, I guess, adding on to that, how what was it called again? How he invented a form of
volley fire.
Called volley fighting. That's right.
Volley fire, yeah.
Volley fire.
It's when you have three banks of guns, one firing, they reload, the next bank fires, they reload, the third bank fires, and by the time the third bank's fired, then the first bank is ready to fire again. So it's like having a machine gun. There's constant fire, essentially, and anything that's coming at you is going to be pulverized. Nobunaga either invented it on his own, or he was one of the people that invented in 3 different places around the world independently. One of them was China, possibly the Netherlands. The first recorded use of this in Europe is in the early 17th century. Possibly it was invented in the Netherlands, or possibly they copied it from Japan. It's unclear exactly as to how that worked.
And is it true that Japan at the time had the most amount of guns?
Well, if the figures are to be believed, and I mean, we can't say for definite because people obviously showed off and boasted, there were more guns in Japan than there were in the whole of the rest of the world put together.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's incredible. I had no idea about that.
Well, that is the result of a century of war. And by the end of the century, Nobunaga could field armies of up to 80,000, 2 or 3 armies of 80,000 at a time. You're talking 200,000 troops under his power. After this, within a few years, you got Hideyoshi invading Kyushu. Hideyoshi was Nobunaga's successor, invading Kyushu with 220,000, and then invading Korea the next decade in various different ways with nearly up to 500,000 troops, either stationed in Japan or stationed in Korea at different times. When you've got that amount of troops going, even if only a quarter of them are guns troops, you've got hundreds of thousands of guns.
Yeah.
So
in terms of battles, did Yasuke engage in warfare?
Well, he's documented as engaging in one battle as a fighter, one battle as an observer, and he probably engaged in another one either as a fighter or as a very near observer.
I know that Yasuke rode alongside Nobunaga, and it would have been very scary, I guess, for their enemies in battle, when they're seeing this giant of a man, riding towards them.
Absolutely. I mean, that's part of the point of why he would have been chosen as Valiano's bodyguard in the first place. Don't mess with me. I've got Yasuke on my side. Nobunaga had an awful lot more power, military power, than Valiano did. Valiano would have only had Yasuke. But at the same time, of course, he would have struck fear into his enemies. There's no doubt about it.
What is the impact of Yasuke's story today?
I have also been in Japan roughly 20 years on and off, and when I first arrived to now, it's a very, very different place. The foreign population has almost trebled in that time, for one. That doesn't include people that have naturalized as Japanese citizens because they just got off the charts as foreigners. And I think there's less than 5 million foreign tourists in 2000 when I came here, and now there's nearly 40 million. It's a very, very different place. And Yasuke has been part of this new Japan because his story has been told just as Japan is experiencing this new wave of international feeling and diverse feeling. So when I've been on Japanese TV, for example, on Tokyo Television a few years ago, they specifically wanted me to talk about diversity. And that taiose in Japanese. That was the that was what they wanted Yasuke to represent. So the Japanese, the native Japanese, if you like, have very much now, they are associating him with the future as much as the past. Mm-hmm. He's a forerunner of people like Naomi Osaka or Asuka Cambridge, both great athletes. Mm-hmm. The new guy, Brown, who's just broken the 10-second 100 meters, and a whole host of other people, especially rugby players, baseballers, who are born in Japan, Japanese citizens, but have come from other ethnicities. And so, yes, he is very much seen as a pioneer in that respect.
You know, I guess he was kind of in mythology in Japan, in pop culture, he was kind of, floating around in the minds of people.
Yeah,
but
that's
for the most part, probably wasn't really known, right? And
yeah, that's a great description. Floating around in people's minds is a good way of putting it. As a vague, most people knew he existed, even if they didn't know his name. He's Nobunaga's black guy, for example, or Nobunaga's black samurai, or something like that. Others knew his name, but not what he'd done, and that kind of thing. And I think that's coming more to the fore. If the world knows more about people like Yasuke, the world will become a better place, because history throughout its whole history has normally been the history of the dominant class of wherever that history is told, whether it be China. Dominant class of China controlled history, the dominant class of Japan controlled history, dominant class of Europe, America, etc. controlled history. And of course, they wrote history for themselves, and they wrote history to congratulate themselves and boost their own image internally as well as externally. Yasuke slipped through those cracks, as he's not a member of any class or caste which was in the ruling state at any point. Therefore, people like him who did great things and who showed great character and really impressed others can show us that we as normal people are also able to do great things as well. Yeah. And I think that's partly why his story, with all the other factors like modern multiculturalism, etc., I think the main thing that why his story resonates with people is because of that. He's a normal guy.
Absolutely.
Right. He's 6'2" and built like a brick, whatnot. But I mean, he's still a normal guy. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think it really, it shakes the paradigm for a lot of people, for history buffs and people who aren't really interested in history. And, I'm sure the movies will help with that. But just on the back of the book, I thought this was a great little description here. It said, travel between countries, cultures, and classes. And that's why
which edition of the book have you got?
I think I've got the British edition. It's this one. This is the book here.
Oh, yeah, that's the British edition. Oh, it's a paperback. I didn't even know the paperback was out.
Yeah, the paperback. So I actually came across it on the way to Japan. I was there a couple of weeks ago, and it was just kind of, I looked over and I thought, wow, what's this? Yasuke, the True Story of the Legendary African Samurai. That's my book.
Like in the airport bookshop or something?
Airport bookshop in Brisbane, Australia.
I had no idea. Yeah. Great stuff.
The word is spreading, and the story will live on. And I find this story just so incredibly motivational, and just intriguing, and it's a really good read. So I really have to thank you, for disseminating this story.
And thank you for reaching out to me. It's great to be great to find people that are interested in your work. It's always good. So thank you for reaching out to me, and thank you for having the courage to propose this interview.
Thank you so much. And I'm going to pass this book on to all my friends, family members, you name it.
Good, and you can get them to buy a copy as well.
Absolutely, of course. So just before you go, Tom, I'm just curious about any future projects you're working on.
I am working on future projects, similar projects of people that have slipped through the cracks of history. Okay. I can't go into too many details, but
no problem.
Give it a year or two, and you may well see another one. Let's wait and see. I have to say it's very difficult to match the awesomeness of Yasuke for a story, but I'm doing my best. I think I think it's going to be hard to match it, but I'm going to do my best. And thank you very much for your support. If people want to reach out and find out more, there's an African Samurai Facebook page. Just click on like and you'll get updates. There's various updates already been. There's actually right now a free signed book giveaway going on this week until next Tuesday. If you're interested in that, check out the African Samurai Facebook page and you can see more there. And also, we do have an AfricanSamurai.com website, but I don't think it's up and running fully yet. So perhaps the Facebook page is better.
Something tells me that this isn't the end of Yasuke. I want to wish you well with all your future endeavors, and hopefully we can maybe talk again soon. Yeah, sure. Great. And thank you once again for having me. And good luck with all of yours. I see it's a new podcast, so I hope it goes swimmingly. Thank you so much. It's such an honor to have you on the podcast. I really appreciate it. Lovely. Thank you very much, Callum. Take care. I hope you enjoyed the episode. Don't forget to check out the African Samurai Facebook page and support the amazing work that Thomas Lockley is doing. Until next time, peace.